We've got some really popular kits that'll take your long bed frames and shorten them down to a short bed frame. But after you do that, you're going to have to shorten down your bedsides also. So today, I'm here to show you how to do that for your 60 to 66 Chevy or GMC trucks. Now, there's a lot of different ways of doing this. There's ways you can do it where there aren't any seam cuts or anything like that, but it does take a bit of time. It's a bit complicated. So today, I'm just going to show you the nicest, safest, easiest way to cut these down. You will have a seam right here that you'll be able to see, but that's fine because it's really popular to have that if you want to be showing your work, or it's going to be really easy to get rid of if you're going to be doing your body work and paint. So stay tuned and we'll turn this into a shorty. All right, so basically the difference between the complicated way and the non-complicated way is your stake pockets here. If we were going to be doing a complicated, we'd be taking this whole stake pocket off the front and the back and getting into a bunch of complicated things. We just don't really want to get into that. So we're going to keep things nice and simple. I'm just going to come over a little bit. I'll cut a nice straight line. I'll go over 8 inches. We'll cut another straight line and we'll simply butt the two together. Now in the front, it's basically the same thing for the same reason. It's the stake pocket hole that becomes the problem. Now if I was going to get fancy on it, I would do a step over and I'd have to do all kinds of weird things and bring it on over. Another way of doing it is you cut off enough metal, but you leave about 1 inch on the edge and you roll it on over. But again, that's a bit complicated. It's a bit much. All I'm going to do is just stay away from my stake pocket hole, come over a few inches, nice straight line, cut it out, nice straight line, cut it out, butt it together, weld it all up, and we're done. Now, I should probably mention along this time that we sell these brand new. You don't have to go to all this time and trouble, but if you're a do-it-yourselfer and you're really going for it, then this is going to be fun for you. But do you want to do your math? Because by the time you get done with cutting it and sandblasting your body work and stuff, you're going to want to know what your dollar differences are so you can make your best decision. Give me a few minutes to gather up a little bit of tools and we'll get started cutting this thing up. So when you're measuring this off where you're going to be cutting everything, what I like to do is simply get a little piece of flat stock and cut it the length that I need it. If you take your tape measure out and you're doing this, then it gets to be a little bit wavy and such. So this right here will keep everything a little bit straighter. Now this piece right here measures 4.5 inches long, and what that's doing for me is it's letting me start on this line to make my marks. But when I get to the top right here, I make sure that I'm far enough away from my stake pocket that it won't interfere with my patch panel clamps when I put it in. So all I'm going to do is just mark this, and I'm going to do it about every couple of inches or so. The more lines that you have on there, the easier it is for you to keep everything nice and straight. So get a lot of markers on there, and then what we're going to do is use some 2-inch tape and transfer over that line too, and that just helps keep everything nice and straight. The 2-inch tape won't buckle on you or twist on you too much, so it'll generally give you a straighter line as a backup, because a straight line, of course, is what you're going to need to have in order to keep your seam nice and clean. If you get really wide gaps, things are going to get a little wicky and maybe not be as attractive as we were shooting for. So I'll do the same thing on the front and the back and put the tape down and etc. But I'll only do one side at a time. If you cut up both sides at the same time, everything gets so flippy floppy that it makes it more difficult for you. So just pick one side, finish it up, and then start on the other. With the exception that I probably wouldn't weld the whole thing up. You got to really remember, in welding, heat is your enemy. And if you don't have something else extra for you to work on, your impatience, at least my impatience, just keeps me welding on up. And if you keep welding on up, you're going to warp your metal, cause yourself trouble and time you don't have. So heat is going to be our enemy, and we want to stay away from that as much as possible. So I'll be giving you some helpful handy hints along the way in order to be able to keep that down. So I've got my lines here, and we got our 2-inch tape, and we'll get it started. And then we'll take it right on down the line. When you get to the corner right here, you really got to make sure that it's tucked into that corner before you bring it up over the rest of the edge. Okay, so that's looking pretty good. Now, on the section right here, it's double walled. So you have your outside wall and your inside wall. But here at the top, it's just a single wall. So when we cut this, we'll be cutting the outer and the inner on the top. Then when we move to the inside, we'll already have this section cut right here and this section cut here. We'll only need to follow our lines to cut this off, so it'll make everything nice and easy as far as that's concerned. Now what I'll be doing next is I'll take another piece of flat stock. It's already measured out for 8 inches. And one of the things you need to do when you lay out this tape, immediately you want to put arrows on where you're going to cut. Okay, because if you did all this measuring and then you cut on this side, you're going to be 2 inches too short. So I am a little bit dyslexic, and I get turned around quite easy. So I have to do this or I will forget and it will not come out right. So after I do that, I got an 8-inch right here, and I'm going to do the same thing. I'll be putting it right on the line, and then I'll be measuring it out. Now, what I'll be doing next is I'll simply cut the outside edge off, and after I cut the outside edge off, I'm going to use this to double check, because it is pretty easy to kind of get these to go off a little bit. But if both sides are off a little bit, they'll match up perfectly. So we have to cut it, and then we have to double check it. So just because you laid down your tape and everything on the second line, it does not automatically mean that it'll be in the right spot. You will have to double check. It's that whole double check, measure twice, cut once kind of thing. Now when I'm laying down this second piece of tape right here, I want to be careful where I'm going to be laying it down. Consistency is going to help you in this project. So we've got our tape on this side of the line. We want to have our tape on this side of the line again. If we were to put it over here, we might get confused and cut on the wrong side. So I'll go ahead and set this on. Carefully get it right down on the line. Tuck it into my corner. Bring it up over my edge, and I am all set. So now I can go ahead and cut this off, flip it over, cut that last piece, and we'll have that all ready to rock and roll. Let's see what that looks like. All right, now which side you place your tape on is partly in how you're going to be cutting it. So you'll see that if the tape is here and then I've got my cutting wheel here, it's going to make it more difficult to see that line, versus if I was cutting on the other side, I'd be able to see that a lot easier. So I'm going to go ahead and cut that from this side, but you know, you're going to want to measure, you want to think about that, how you're going to be able to cut this comfortably and see the line comfortably before you decide which way you're going to go. You might be left-handed, and otherwise that wouldn't be a problem for you. So here we go. So one thing I want to mention here is that if you watch my other videos in the past in how to cut metal, I generally advise you not to bury your blade, because there can be supports and things underneath there. This is going to be different though. If we bury our blade, it helps us keep it nice and straight. If you're only on the top of the metal, it's a lot easier to get wicky-wacky on it. So you are going to be burying your blade. In this case, it's just the 1,000,000 to 1 exclusion rule in this. So Now another thing I've done here is I've left just a little bit of metal right here, and I've left just a little bit of metal right here too. This way I'll be able to flip it over without everything coming apart on me. Yeah. So now, since this is just a single wall on the top, you can see where the cut is, and all we'll have to do is just transfer that line right on over. We can see the cut on this side too, so that's going to make it easier. I'll go ahead and cut this off, then the little bit of tabs at the front and the back, or the top and the bottom, then this will come on off. Now you might be thinking to yourself, well, I'll cut the inside piece first, and then I'll cut the out piece. Don't do that. Now also, when you're cutting, you want to have one of your hands or one of your arms actually in contact with the metal. You don't want to hold your die grinder up in the air because it'll hurt and jerk and all kinds. So you get stabilization by actually being on the metal. Use both your hands. So I'll take this off, I'll put it aside safely, and then what I'll do is I'll remeasure all of this stuff again to make sure it's nice and straight. So we've got our 8-inch rear, and we're just going to butt it right up against the edge of the metal, and then we can see what's going on. So it looks like this is just a hair off. So I'm going to take this tape back off, clean these lines off, and do it again. And that's pretty common, and it's only off by like, I mean, the 32nd of an inch or something like that. But getting this gap as perfect as possible is really going to help you out. Give me a minute. Okay, so this is actually easier to do after the fact because you can just butt this right up to the edge of the cut. But I still like to map everything out and put the tape down just because it just helps keep the program in order, if you will. You're knowing which side you're cutting on and et cetera, et cetera. So it's just a good idea to do that. Okay, again, remember, keep your hands in contact with the bedside for stability. Leave yourself about an inch at the top and an inch at the bottom, and then you can flip it over, finish it off. A little like this. So when I cut the outside, it cuts into the inside a little bit right here. So all I got to do is just mark that line and continue it down. I'm going to double check again with this right here. And lay the tape down again just to be on the safe side. And here you can see how I have only about an inch hold in here, and I've just got an inch hold in there. Just makes it more secure. If you were to cut these off, everything you want to start flopping over, and it makes this more difficult. So I'll cut my metal section out first in the middle, and then we'll do our ends. I'm going to slide it onto the table so that when it gets cut off, it doesn't fall off and bend. So now what I'm going to be doing is just cleaning up all of these burrs and everything on the edge and grinding away a little bit of metal, because if you have paint or dirt or grease or anything near your welds, it's going to upset your welds and you're not going to get a good weld. Now when I'm grinding on this, I'm using 80 grit or 120 grit because I don't want to use something really heavy like 36 or 40 grit because it's going to chew too much of the metal away. So let me get this all cleaned up on both sides, and then we'll put it all back together again. Okay, now to keep things nice and neat and really looking good, what we're going to do, and when we're grinding off this side here, is we're going to put some tape on it, giving us about, I don't know, maybe 1/4 of an inch to grind that paint off. If you don't do this, a lot of times what will happen is you'll just get grinding too much and then this will be all wide and ugly and things like that. So if you want to keep it all looking cool and neat, we're going to do this right here. So grinding the paint off, this is a really good paint stripper right here, this kind of thing you can use, and it's sometimes a little bit easier than using your die grinder there. So I'm going to get this all cleaned up, and then I'll finish the other side and we'll start putting it together again. So you can see by putting the tape on there, it kind of keeps me from going too wide and erratic on my sanding. This is all looking good now. It's a little bit easier to assemble with my patch panel clamps if it's upside down. So I'll do that here. When you're flipping it upside down and this and that, you kind of want to keep away from doing it here because you might warp it. So try to grab it from the middle or have a buddy help you. So when it's flipped around like that, you probably notice that this wasn't even, and it would make it more difficult to get my patch panels in, but we flip it over and now we're even, and it's going to be easier to get our patch panels in. So what I'm going to do is we have to make sure our lines, of course, are totally straight. So I'm going to be using this line in the center to get everything straight, and then I'll work my way out the edges. And before I start putting in patch panel clamps, I'm going to just put it up here and see what everything's looking like. It looks like maybe down here on the bottom I was a little bit off, but no, I think we're good to go. So now what we're going to need to do is use patch panel clamps. So you're going to want to buy probably at least 2 packs of these, because I think it comes 10 to the pack maybe, and you want to use as many as possible, because the more you have in here, the firmer it's going to be and the straighter it's going to be. So if you aren't familiar with these, what we're looking at here is this little square piece, and that'll go underneath the piece that you're going to be welding. And then this piece right here, you see that just fits in there like that. We'll put it in, and then we'll tighten it up, and that'll get our patch panels nice and even and grouped together. Now, when you put these in, you'll have a little bit of space between the metal. And you might be thinking to yourself, well, I want to have it as close as possible for the closest weld, what have you. The only problem with that is that if you have a completely butted up weld and there's no gap at all, if you weld and it does not permeate all the way through the metal, and then you grind off the top of that weld, it may not hold and it might break. So we need a little bit of a gap for that weld to go in and stay. Now when we grind off the top, we still have the weld that's in the center keeping everything together. So I like to start in this top, like I said. It's a little bit difficult to get up in there. So what you do is you simply get this clamp started at the bottom, and then just go ahead and bring it up to the top here. So first I'll get a clamp right there, keeping all my lines together. And I'm doing this pretty tight, I'm not clamping it down seriously hard yet, because I got to get the rest of the clamps in. I'll need to move it around a little bit. After we're secure, then we can tighten everybody up. So it'll just take me a few minutes to get this here on, and I'll be back in 2 and 2. So once my inside's secure, and I get this right here too, then it's tough enough to where I can flip it over and I can finish off this. And then same thing like on the inside, you just get one started, and then you just go ahead and slide it all the way up. So like that, and then tighten it up a hair, and then slide it forward and tighten it on up. And get the next one and just keep going. All right, so I've got all of my little clamps here on. Everybody's snugged up, but not too tight, because I still need to knock things around a little bit to get it perfect. I got to make sure this line right here is looking really good. This line here is looking really good. So I'll use a rubber mallet, or sometimes I'll use just a block of wood so we don't do any damage to the metal. We'll knock things into position. What I'll do is just use a small crescent wrench to tighten them up the rest of the way. Now you constantly have to be watching everything, because just minor flipping things around, or when you get welding, somehow things just get off. So you have to constantly watch your lines and your welds and make sure that nothing's going off track on you. If something starts to go off track, the board's warped or what have you, stop immediately and fix it. Don't keep welding, because once you do, you kind of like lock it in cement, and then any repairs you got to try to make are going to be a lot more difficult. So constant keeping an eye on it and fix it immediately should be okay. And what I do is I tighten a little bit, go back, tighten a little bit. I don't want to just grab one of these and over torque it, because it might cause a contortion in the metal. So we've got our welder set up. Now what I like to do is use a thinnest wire I can get, which is generally 0.023. The thicker the wire, the higher the heat. The higher the heat, the more chances you're going to warp stuff. So we go with a thin wire. When we're welding, it's one weld, go about 4 inches, one weld, 4 inches, one weld, 4 inches, one weld. You just keep on welding, you're going to warp it sure as shooting. So you got to make sure that you have like another project going at the same time. So that's why I'm going to be just tack welding this together. Then we'll start on the other side. Then we'll be able to bounce back and forth, and that'll keep us from warping anything out, hopefully. So the speed and the voltage, that'll vary a lot depending on your welder, so I'm not going to be getting into that. Now, a lot of times when you're welding, if you just hit it with one quick, like zot, it'll blow through the metal. So what you want to do is just do a quick little zot and get a little bit of a BB going, and then build on top of that BB and make it a little bit bigger. Then you can hit the BB a little bit longer, and then it'll meld in. So a little bit like this. Got our BB started, get a little bit bigger. Now just melt down. Now sometimes you might get lucky and just do a hit, and it welds up both of them. So you can use either, depending on how close the metal is, how thick the metal is, that kind of thing. All right, so a couple things I want to point out right now is down here at the bottom, this typically is not going to line up real nice and easy. And right here at the top, it doesn't line up real nice and easy either. And that's just because the metal is just want to torque out and stuff. So we're not going to mess with these just yet. We're going to get all these other welds nice and secure. And then once we've got this bottom pretty beefed out, then we can go ahead and manipulate the metal and get it into shape better and finish that off. But if all of these welds are still not finished, then when we're messing around with this, it kind of makes everything else warp out. So get everything solid, then work your difficult edges. We've got our welds set up about every inch or so, and what we want to do now is go ahead and just gently grind down these welds. Not necessarily all the way, but at least a big chunk of it off. I don't want to get all my welds on here and then grind all my welds at the same time. It takes longer and it builds up more heat, causing the metal to warp. Now here, what I want to do is use a 36 or a 40 grit, because I want to take these off quick, and they're so small it won't generate a lot of heat. Really, your best way to do it is use the little air grinder with a 40 grit on one of these little wheels right here, because again, it just doesn't build up that much heat. I don't have one today, so I'm just going to get 40 grit and use it on my electric die grinder, which is fine. I've never warped one anyway, but you have your choices there. Another thing you want to notice is that every time before I weld, you'll see me touch the weld to make sure everything's even before I hit it with a welder. If it's not, just get your hammer and dolly and hammer it out a little bit and get it nice and even before you continue on. Now that this is secured, so that I don't heat it up too much, we're going to go to the front and we're going to work on that. So now I'm going to cut my 12 inches out of the front. I've got my flat stock already measured out at 12 inches to make things easier. And again, what we got to do is stay away from the stake pocket right here. We don't want to cut into it. We don't want to have it too close. We want to get over just a little bit. So in that endeavor, what I've done is cut another one at 6 1/4 inches. And then to help me keep my line straight, this line right here is pretty straight, so I'll go ahead and make some marks. Now this right here, it slopes in, so we can't use it there, but we'll get enough lines to where when we put our tape on, we'll be able to see if we're straight or not. So a bit like this. All right, so this time when you're gonna lay down your tape, you're gonna like figure out which way is gonna be the most comfortable for you to cut it. And then we know we can place our tape on this side. I'm gonna do the bottom half here because I have the most marks on there and I can probably get that straightest first. Don't like it, start with no tape. Everything's marked. We've got our arrows where we are cutting so we don't forget. And I'm gonna start cutting it out. So. So one thing I probably want to mention now is that the gray on the light blue, now that might show up on camera pretty good, but when you get this going and all the sparks, it's a bit harder to see the line. So really, I probably should have used a brighter tape on here. Consider that whenever you're choosing the tape you're going to be using for this. Go with a really opposite color so it's vivid and easy to see. Again, we've left an inch at the top and an inch at the bottom so that it's secure enough to be able to flip over like this. Now I'll cut the inside just like I did the back. Okay, so when I got to the top right here, I don't know, I was at a bad angle or whatever, I couldn't see too good, and I cut this a little off. It's probably 1/8 of an inch or so in. I don't know if the camera's picking it up, but it is. But that's okay, because as long as we duplicate our cut exactly 12 inches over, everything's gonna match up. So we're gonna get this, and we are gonna make our lines all over again, okay? All right, so just like on the back side, I put a 120 grit on here. I'm going to clean off all these burrs on the back so they don't interrupt my patch panel clamps. Keep everything even. And get your fingers up in here and feel for them to make sure that everything's out. All right, everything's looking good. We're back together. We snugged everybody up and such, and it's looking good. Now, let's say, for instance, cutting is the whole thing on this. You gotta cut straight. But let's say, for instance, you did get something like this, and you got a wide gap down here, and you got a wide gap down here. When you're putting this together with the clamps and stuff, it'll bring any imperfections out. And you might need to just grind off a little bit so that you can get that straight. So just take your time at that time and fix it before you get going, because we don't want any crazy wicky-wack stuff going on. Now I'm going to start the weld in the middle again, and we're going to work towards our ends just like this. So our other side's all set up. I've been going back and forth and doing my tack welds. What I'll do is just find the largest gap, give myself 3 or 4 inches, largest gap. I'll just continue on closing the gaps. Now you're only going to do 1, 2, maybe 3 passes with your spot welds. Let it cool down, do the other side, then come back and grind it. Then do another pass, so on and so forth. Once I've got this stable enough down here with enough welds, I can go ahead and manipulate this end to get it all to match up and everything. So I'll just be using hammers, pliers, whatever I need to do to get this to match up and go ahead and weld it. But again, if I was to try this too soon, it would just be too floppy up here and you wouldn't be able to get it going good. So I'm going to have to hammer and dolly that just a little bit more before I get the weld on it, but you get the idea for that. So I'm going to finish that off, and then I'm going to finish off a section here that looks all nice and clean and stuff, because I don't want to bore you with 1,000 welds. All right, so take a look at that one section there. That's how it should look when you get all done with it if you take your time. Now what I've done to get it to that is I used the 40 grit first to keep our heat down and just did my small welds. Then when I got them all nice and even, I finished off with a hard wheel right here. And this can get into, I can just really tailor this and get it really picky, whereas a flap wheel is a little bit not as picky. And then I'll finish it off with a 120, and then I'll use this flap wheel right here, and that'll get my heavy scratches out of there so I can do my paint and body. So now you can see that this is all looking pretty nice. I'm not going to finish this thing off. This is just an old bedside that a customer gave us. It's pretty messed up on the inside, so it's not really worth finishing off. Just wanted to show you how to do these as fast, as easy as possible. Again, there's a bunch of different ways to skin a cat that are a bit more complicated, but this is going to be nice and neat, especially if you're going to be doing body work. That'll be covered up and nobody will ever know. Now this went pretty nice and easy. There wasn't too many troubles, but let's say for instance you ran into some. What those problems might be is, you know, you could have just cut this all wicky-wacky. And the nice thing about metal is if you don't like where it is, you can just cut it and put it back where you want it and weld it up all over again. Another thing that happens is even though you're really careful, you can get your sheet metal to warp. And you can kind of see there on camera, I welded that a little bit faster and hotter to purposely sink it in. When you heat up metal, it shrinks. So if you've got a large panel like that, it's going to duck in like this. Here where you've got multiple angles, every time you bend metal, it makes it stronger. So you don't have to worry as much about a section like this, but you should always maintain the same practices everywhere just so that you keep a consistent work. Now, if you had that metal sink in right there, these bedsides are kind of nice because it's only double walled right here in the middle. You can hammer and dolly on both sides of the top, and on the bottom section down here you can do that. And what you would be doing is, since the weld shrank the metal, what we're going to do is we're going to hammer on dolly. I don't have my dolly today, but hammering on dolly is you just have your metal dolly and you're going to hammer the metal right on there. And what that's going to do is expand the metal. So you shrank it, now you expand it, and you made it nice and even. So you can see it's really not that big of a deal. This probably isn't going to be your first job. You're going to want to work your way up to this, do smaller patch panels, get experience welding up the firewall, your inner fenders and things like that. And then when you're feeling confident, then go ahead and get a big piece of metal and cut it all up. My name's David Welch. I'm at Brothers Tech Center all the time so that I can show you how to get your truck back on the road. With Brothers' help, my help, and your help, we're going to save every single truck they ever made. Next Tuesday, man.